I should just start by saying welcome to everyone, especially the students, and explain that today we have Bo Libert having the lecture. He is introduced on the webpage of the course, but as you say, this is the person among all of us in the Swedish Aral Sea Society with the largest and most thorough experience from your region, who has traveled extensively on various official missions in the region. And he is the one who will have the lecture on water issues in Central Asia. So you may remember that last time it was global water issues with Gunilla Björklund, and now it is more regional water issues, and perhaps a little local. We will hear from Bo, and we will, as before, have 30 minutes lecture and then a break with some questions and discussions, and then a further 30 minutes. And then, of course, in the afternoon, there are some, presentations from students. Okay, Bo, please, the word is yours.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Lars. Yeah, it feels a little bit strange to be far away from you up in the north and making a presentation on the Aral Sea. I mean, a region where you're the closest. I have actually been only once in Nukus. It was a very nice visit, and we had a bus going to Muinak. So I have seen, all of these, what has been distributed all over the world, the pictures of the rusty boats in the Aral Sea. But mostly, I've been working for the UN on transboundary water cooperation between the countries in Central Asia, and that's what I'm going to be dealing with mostly in this presentation. I'm sure that you will have questions, that you will have, you may not agree to everything that I'm saying. So I look very much forward to having your feedback after you've had the opportunity to listen to me. I will share my screen now, and I will try to select the correct one, of course. Do you see my screen now? No?
No.
No?
Oh, no.
Let's see.
You have the share screen in the bottom of your.
Yeah, I know, but I don't find the. Just hang on a second. I haven't so many things open on my desk, so that's maybe the problem.
We should see your screen regardless of how many things you have on your desk. But
yeah,
I think
so too.
there might be a little mark saying share that you have to also click on your camera.
Okay, but there you have something completely different.
Ah, there we are. Yes.
Yeah, but that's not the correct one. That's not the correct one.
You have to click on your right picture, of course, on your screen.
Okay.
You can close this one if it's.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. Okay, let's do it again. Here we are. Okay. Sorry for that. Now you can see something which is close to a PowerPoint, can't you?
Yeah.
Okay. Now we're going ahead. Okay?
That's correct. Thank you.
Yeah, finally, sorry for this delay. Well, I can just say I'm retired from the UN, so I used to work 15 years in Geneva with a certain focus on Central Asia. So what I'm going to say here will be and Tashkent. Let's try to start with a few points that we could share. First of all, in the Aral Sea basin, you have the rivers Amu Darya and Sir Darya, which are shared between many countries. All or most of the water used is used, and mainly for irrigation. That you know as well. There are some ongoing work in the Amu Darya Delta that you may know of, trying to re-establish water surfaces there, trying to re-establish certain lakes around the delta. So there are some positive work going, but maybe the most positive things lately that has happened is that on the Kazakh side, they have been able to dam the outlet of Sir Darya. So you have what you call a northern Aral Sea, where actually where water is supplied from Sir Darya, and where actually you have a new ecosystem with fisheries, with plants and so on. So there are some positive things happening around the port there, the previous port, which is called Aralsk. This is a map that you have probably seen many versions of, and I'd just like to point out that the water comes from mountainous region in Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan mainly, and runs down to the flat land in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. There are not only the rivers of Sir Darya and Amu Darya. I want to point out, by the way, that frequently it's forgotten that a lot of the water to Amu Darya, the water that passes by you in Karakalpakstan, comes from Afghanistan. I'd like to point out that the Karakum Canal diverts quite a lot of the water from the Amu Darya to Turkmenistan. If they wouldn't have the Karakum Canal in Turkmenistan, they would have very little of water and very little of irrigated land. There are other rivers, such as the Serafshan, which runs from Tajikistan into Uzbekistan, and which is important for irrigation in Uzbekistan. And you have the two rivers Chu and Talas that is running from Kyrgyzstan down to Kazakhstan. So all of these rivers are not connected, were not connected to the Aral Sea, but they are important until now. Well, you have seen this picture, of course, that in a very short time of basically 20 years, what was one of the biggest lakes in the world became more or less extinct. Now, a little bit about the countries sharing the basin. And you have 6 countries, 5 of which were part of the Soviet Union: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, and 1 country that was outside the Soviet Union. And all of these countries uses a lot of the water in the basin. I mean, you have in Afghanistan 20 cubic kilometers, which is quite a big volume. Kazakhstan, 14 cubic kilometers. Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, a little bit less, 7 and 10, because the countries are smaller. Turkmenistan, 26 cubic kilometers, and Uzbekistan, as much as 50 cubic kilometers, which can be explained, of course, that Uzbekistan is the biggest country in terms of population in the region. I have added here the organizations, the ministries in charge of water management in the respective countries, because it shows a bit the focus of the water use. And especially you can, if I take as an example, Tajikistan, there you have a Ministry of Energy and Water Resources, because hydropower is extremely important for Tajikistan. This is the same thing in Kyrgyzstan, and in those two countries, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, there are no, or basically no, hydrocarbon energy resources, which you have in Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, where you have a lot of oil, gas, and coal. So there is a sort of the countries after sovereignty sort of have different challenges that you can understand. I want to look at a little bit in this table, and I just want you to look at the third column here, actually. And this column, it shows how much of the water used in the respective countries are used for irrigation. And you can actually see that if it wasn't for irrigation, almost no water would be used. The one exception is Kazakhstan, where you actually have a lot of industry and so there are other water uses too. But more than 90% of the water in the other countries are used for irrigation, are used and are lost in irrigation. And I'll come back to that. Here is also a table where I don't want you to look at the whole table. I just want you to look at the acreages of irrigated land that you have in these countries. And, you know, these are fairly, from a sort of a world perspective, very high levels of irrigated land. I mean, if you look at Sweden, we have in total 3 million hectares of land, of arable agricultural land. So we have less ordinary fields than Uzbekistan have irrigated fields. So it's quite extensive also from a world perspective. And why did this happen? I mean, you probably know the background, but just a few words about that. Cotton turned out to be a strategic resource for the Soviet Union, and this was the reason why such a huge effort was made to increase the area of the acreage of irrigated land in the region. And actually this was done fully understanding that it would have consequences for the Aral Sea. So the Aral Sea resource was not seen as an important resource from the Soviet perspective. And of course, today you have people working, not the least in Uzbekistan, you have people working and depending on this irrigated land. So it's very difficult, you know, to say that, look, we don't need the cotton anymore, so we don't need the irrigated land. That's quite an impossible thing for a president or another person to say. Now, this is a diagram which I have been shown many times in Central Asia. It shows the blue is water requirements in the region. If the demand would continue business as usual with a higher population and with climate change. And the green is the available water. And what this diagram says basically is that, look, the population is increasing, climate change is making life more difficult, and that is why we will have less and less water available. But I would like to show you another picture, another diagram, which is slightly more hopeful. It's also slightly more complicated, but let's try to understand. This diagram. This is the situation in 2050, but it is a range of the globe on the gross domestic product, I mean the economic productivity in different regions, depending on how well they are adapting to climate change. And as you can see in most of the regions, say if you look at Middle East, which is here, you see only a negative trend, a negative effect of climate change. While in Central Asia, you see opportunities for even an increase of GDP in spite of the climate change. And why is that? The reason is that in Central Asia, water is used very inefficiently. The irrigation and the whole water infrastructure is so inefficient. So maybe only half of the water that is sort of diverted to irrigation is not used. So there are plenty of opportunities to improve the situation. And there are some basin-wide issues, and I will go over to the regional issues now. By the way, do you understand what I'm saying with regard to this slide?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so you're using water inefficiently, and this is why there are opportunities for the future. If you look at the basin-wide issues, I mean the issues where you actually need to cooperate, and that is the first is the water overuse for irrigation mainly. Then you have what we call a water energy conflict, and I want to show this picture. In the two countries, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, where hydropower is so important, they want to use most of the hydropower, or to generate most of the hydropower in the wintertime, while the downstream countries, where water is required for irrigation in summer, they don't want to have the water in the wintertime. They want to have it in spring and summer, and even beginning of the autumn. So when water is released, for example, from the Taktagul Dam in Kyrgyzstan, it runs down Sirdarya without having the possibility to be used for irrigation. So this is a clear problem in the cooperation between the countries. A third item, which is basin-wide, is the issue of dam safety. If you build a dam upstream and the dam is being destroyed, then you have a problem downstream with water flowing. And actually providing a lot of insecurity to the people living downstream. And you had a recent accident in the Sardobe Dam, you may have heard of that, where not only parts of Uzbekistan had a problem and were flooded, but also a part of Kazakhstan. So there is an issue there, and there is a need for cooperation. There are some first steps taken to enforce such a cooperation, to make sure that all dams are safe along the rivers, but much more needs to be done. A fourth area of cooperation is water quality, where you maybe are sitting in the perfect storm of a bad water quality. I'd like to hear what you're saying about the water quality in Nukus. But this is also an issue where basically no cooperation between the countries are in place. And the further downstream you come of the rivers, the worse, for example, salinity you get in the water because of the salts that are picked up during irrigation by the water. Now, on the national level, here is a slide in Russian. I hope you can read it, but this is just a few bullets about what is planned in Uzbekistan in order to save water, because you don't have, especially like this, you don't have enough water. There is a risk that there will be less water this year than in 2008. Because you can see already now that the water level in the Taktagul Dam is very low. So what they are trying to do, and what the state is trying to do, is to get better canals, so you have less losses in the canals. You try to diminish irrigated land where you have problems with water, access to water. You try to improve water quality or water efficiency by, for example, introducing drip water and some other efforts that are being made. So, and I think that in Uzbekistan, more maybe than in other Central Asian countries, there has actually been quite a lot done in order to effectivize the use of water in the region. But cooperation is something that will give benefits to all countries. And there has been recently an estimate done on how much the countries would gain from cooperating better on water management. And the sum is there is an estimate of an annual loss of $4.5 billion because of the lack of cooperation. For example, I mean, there are three basic directions here where you can get these losses. First of all, if you cannot predict the access to water, you will have a lower agricultural productivity. If you cannot use hydropower efficiently, or if you cannot trade energy between the countries, you lose also a lot. And if you don't cooperate, you also have limited access to international finance. So there are quite a lot of negative effects from lack of cooperation between countries. And here another Russian slide where I wanted to stress that there is a dynamic link between the different sectors that are using the water resources. And you know, you need to understand the interrelations better in order to optimize the use of water and to adapt the politics and the cooperation between the sectors as well as the countries. But there is almost, at least, no discussion on the protection of water-based ecosystems and water quality in the region. So except for perhaps this northern Aral Sea that I was referring to in the beginning and the work that is being done in the Amudarya Delta, there's very little done and very little discussion on how to protect the ecosystem. The discussions are all about how to efficiently use the water in different sectors. So there are huge steps that needs to be taken in this regard. I'm already getting to the break. We have a few minutes left, but maybe we can have the break slightly earlier. And I have two questions for you for the break. There are no specific, responses to these questions. I just like to have your sort of brainstorm ideas for on the questions. The first question is, could the Aral Sea be reestablished? Is that an opportunity? What do you say? And secondly, is maybe closer to you and your day-to-day life. What could be done to improve quality of the available water in Nukus? This is also a question. I don't have a response to that. Maybe you have some ideas. So do you have any specific question? I think we have time for one or two questions now. Otherwise, we'll take a break. What do you say? Okay, let's try to continue, and I will speak a little bit more about other things. I appreciate very much that you spent your energy on the questions that I proposed. Very interesting, and it would be, of course, great to discuss this in more detail at some point. Okay, let's see. Let's continue if I can. Let's talk now about something that we started to talk actually about during the break, transboundary waters in more general. Most rivers actually worldwide, they cross borders. And in many of the rivers, you have a joint management through agreements and joint institutions. For example, the Danube Commission, and that sort of manages the most international river in the world. Danube, I think, has 13 riparian countries. So there are many wills that has to be adapted to during in that commission. And generally, you have the sense that water cooperation prevails over conflict, which means that countries that have agreed to work together, they find ways to avoid conflict. And frankly speaking, I think Central Asia has done that relatively well, although the countries have not always been good friends, but they have not been serious conflicts. However, if there is an increasing water stress, like for example, because of climate change, this might increase the possibility that you would have a conflict. And you could say that majority of transboundary basins outside of Europe doesn't have basin agreements or existing agreements that lack certain crucial provisions. And therefore, there is a need for a global legal and intergovernmental framework for transboundary cooperation. And if you look at the SDG 6 on water, there is a target that says that by 2030, integrated water resources management at all levels, including transboundary cooperation, should be implemented. And this is what I'm going to start to talk about in this second session. And I want to first of all raise the issue of international conventions. And international conventions provide what we call international law. And international law is not a law where you have police. I mean, what the countries do that accept certain conventions, they accept the convention as a basis for cooperation, but there's nobody coming out to them and giving them a fee, I mean, putting them in jail if they don't follow exactly the convention. It's something that it's up to the goodwill of the countries that ratify a specific convention to apply it. And the convention I've been working with for much of my professional time at the UN is the Convention on the Protection and Use of Transboundary Watercourses and International Lakes. And it has an objective to protect and ensure the quantity, quality, and sustainable use of transboundary water resources. And one thing which is important here is that the convention is based on the 3 legal principles. And these are not easy, but they are principally easy, but they are not easy to combine. The first is the right of reasonable and equitable use, which means that if you are sharing a lake or a river, you have the right to use that river. For example, for irrigation, for hydropower production, etc. But you are also obliged to avoid causing what is called significant transboundary harm. You should not do such things that would significantly decrease the possibility for another country to use the same river or the same lake. The third principle is to cooperate. The question is, how do you find the balance between the right to use and the obligation to avoid causing significant transboundary harm? And that is exactly in the cooperation process that you find this balance. You are obliged not to cut the water. For example, I mean, in the river, you should not divert the river to another place, because then the downstream riparian or the country doesn't get the river at all. That is causing a significant transboundary harm. But you could use part of that river without causing this significant transboundary harm. But to agree on what is a reasonable and equitable use and what is causing significant transboundary harm, you really need to have a dialogue between the countries to find the proper place where you should find your use and non-use of water. In Europe, all of these green countries are party to the convention. And in fact, as I told earlier, all of the countries, basically all of the basins in the river basins and lake basins in this region do have agreement and commissions to cooperate on shared water use and water protection. There are a few countries which are non-parties. This is actually a convention of what is called the UNECE, which is a regional commission of the UN, the Economic Commission for Europe, where Central Asia is a part. You can see that, let me see, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan are not parties, while Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan are parties. Here is in another region, difficult region in Caucasus, Georgia and Armenia are not part of the convention. And there is a tendency that upstream countries are a little bit afraid of joining the commission because they believe that they would get some kind of a negative feedback from the downstream countries. I don't think that's correct, but this is what we have to live with. This convention, it has been a regional convention, which is for Europe and for Central Asia, but it's now been extended so all countries in the world can join it. And there are examples now of countries in Africa that have joined the UNECE Water Convention. Just a few obligations under the convention to develop the cooperation that you need to develop on transboundary waters. You have an obligation to conclude specific agreements and to establish what is called joint bodies or commissions. You have to agree to consultations, which means that one country can ask another country, look, we don't think that what you're doing here on the river or on the lake is appropriate. Let's discuss what you're doing. They have to develop joint monitoring and assessment, which means that they are having monitoring stations in all countries and they share the results. They exchange information. They may try to want to develop warning and alarm systems. For example, I talked about dam safety. If a dam upstreams would break, then there should be an alarm system to the downstream parts of the river in order to make the situation more or less safe for the people living there. There have been accidents in the region where actually many people have died, and these alarm systems, they should be set up in such a way so you avoid a critical situation. And mutual assistance, which means that, okay, if you have a problem, I help you. If I have a problem, you help me. So that's kind of a certain number of obligations under this convention. Now, this is a little bit maybe outside the immediate scope of what we're talking about. There are actually two conventions, and which is quite strange. Both conventions are UN conventions. They have, in principle, same rules and same legal basis, but the UNECE convention started as a regional convention for a certain number of countries and became global because it has been seen as a very efficient convention. While the UN Water Convention here started on the global level, it took a lot longer before it became approved and entered into force. But now these two conventions are working side by side. And in fact, the UNECE Water Convention is because they have a secretariat which the UN Water Convention doesn't have. So the Secretariat of the UNECE Convention also works with the UN Water Convention. And I think that Uzbekistan is party to both of these conventions, and the conventions are actually mutually reinforcing themselves. They are not causing any problems for each other. Now, let's look a little bit on the situation in Central Asia, the water cooperation in Central Asia. You may have heard of the International Fund for the Saving of the Aral Sea. You may have heard of International National Commission for Water Coordination and International Commission for Sustainable Development, which are all organizations set up between the 5 Central Asian states to deal with various issues. In Russian, they have different acronyms. МФСА, Международный фонд спасения Аральского моря, МКВК, Международная комиссия координация воды, МКУР, Международная комиссия устойчивого развития. So these are all organizations where the 5 countries have agreed, okay, let's cooperate. However, the cooperation is not very smooth for different reasons. One reason is that it is at least ICWC and IFAS is so focused on irrigation, so it does not take into account the sectors that I was talking about, the hydropower sector. It doesn't take care of the ecosystems, etc. So, and that is one reason why Kyrgyzstan presently is not taking part in the IFAS cooperation or the ICWC or ICSD. Another problem is that IFAS, or the main governing body of IFAS, which is the executive committee of IFAS, changes chairmanship every 3rd year or 2nd year, which means that you presently Tajikistan is the chair, has to set up separately the secretariat, it has to receive the representatives coming from the different countries, and this is all a long bureaucratic period, even to set up the secretariat. It would be much more efficient to have one secretariat in one place in Central Asia in order to have a continuity of the cooperation. But I mean, I'm not the one. I've been working quite a lot with IFAS, and there is a lot of goodwill, but a lot needs to be done in order to make it function properly. And another thing which is missing in this cooperation is also the cooperation with Afghanistan. Afghanistan, not being a country inside the Soviet Union, has disqualified it from the beginning from the IFAS, ICWC, and ICSD. But now, of course, if you want to have cooperation that joins all the countries in the basins, you also have to include Afghanistan, which is not easy, by the way, because of the political problems in that country. Instead, or in addition, you have under very quick development, actually, bilateral cooperation. Well, you may have heard of the Chu and Talas River and the bilateral cooperation between Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, which has been ongoing since 2000 and is quite efficient. There is also new cooperation between Afghanistan and Tajikistan on the Panj River, which is the upstream part of the Amudarya. There are also new cooperation initiative between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. And as you have heard, nowadays these bilateral cooperation directions are being strengthened. So there is a sort of focus right now on bilateral cooperation between the countries. But it will be difficult to have an efficient cooperation on the bilateral level if you don't know how the other countries are working together. So there is actually a need for a regional cooperation as well as bilateral cooperation, because there are other issues, more smaller issues that you will deal with on bilateral cooperation. If you look at the Danube cooperation, for example, you have the Danube Commission, then you have certain commissions on the tributary level. For example, the Sava River Commission, which is part of the Danube, where in the Sava River Commission, they are discussing more specific issues related to the Sava River. And then you have, in addition to that, you have bilateral cooperation agreements, which are dealing with more practical and smaller scale things. So there is a need for cooperation on many levels, and of course, all levels should be as efficient as possible and deal with the most specific and urgent issues at that level. Okay, there are many proposals has been many proposals in history to develop a more efficient cooperation on water and energy resources, for example, in Central Asia. And this is one example of a publication which is available in Russian and in English, where you can read about what may be needed in order to develop the cooperation. And there are even organizational schemes of how future joint bodies or commissions could be set up. This is an example which was called Short Obama, I think, because of some of the words in the title. And there you have a different setup where you have separate basin commissions for Amudarya and for Sirdarya. You have a Water and Energy Council dealing with the balancing of water and energy issues, and you have an Environmental Council under a council of heads of states that the presidents would meet to make certain crucial decisions relating both the environment and the sectors using the water. So there are plenty of ideas out there, and there are plenty of opportunities to develop the cooperation in the region to become more efficient. Now, in the end of my presentation, I will just show you a few slides on sort of and tell you a little bit, a few stories about the cooperation. This is a picture from a dam on the Talas River, which is quite interesting because it's just upstream of the city of Taras, which is a 500,000 city in Kazakhstan. But this dam is in Kyrgyzstan. And you can imagine the catastrophe that would take place if this dam would break. And there have been rumors in a couple of instances where for example, during one of the revolutions in Kyrgyzstan, where there were rumors downstream in the Taras city that this dam would be blown to pieces. And if that would happen, actually hundreds of thousands of people would probably die downstream. So there is what happened then, and what we tried to manage to make a joint security assessment of the dam to make sure that the downstream people are safer and to make sure that they are calmer. This kind of cooperation, I think, is very important in your region and in other regions as well. This is a map of the Chu and Talas rivers, which are flowing from Kyrgyzstan down to Kazakhstan. These two relatively small rivers are very important for irrigation and water, drinking water in the two countries. In this case, there is an agreement from 2000 where Kazakhstan actually pays Kyrgyzstan for the management of certain dams and canals that are in the country of Kyrgyzstan. So this is a sort of an example of a functional cooperation. They even look at water quality. However, not enough on water-related ecosystems. This is the Pianch River between where you see Afghanistan on one side and Tajikistan on the other side. And as you can understand, it's easier for Tajiks and Afghans to cooperate because they talk basically the same language. And I've been also dealing with setting up some kind of cooperation framework between Tajikistan and Afghanistan. Nowadays, they have an agreement on cooperation on at least on the hydrology exchange of information. And here you can see some Afghan and Tajiks preparing for measurement of the flow of the big Pianch River, which is part of the Amudaya. Finally, this is a meeting that was arranged. I don't remember exactly which year, but that tried to sell the idea of water quality cooperation. This is a meeting in Almaty, and the problem with water quality cooperation between countries is that there are so many institutions in each country that are involved in somehow in the water quality management. You have the ministries, of course, of water resources. You have Sanepidemnadzor, which is the health authorities. You have the monitoring authorities. So there are plenty of people that are sharing responsibility for the volume and the quality of water. And so far, there is no good basis for water quality cooperation in Central Asia. And you as young people, you must really see to that, especially if you're living in a region such as Karakalpakstan. That was all for me. I will leave you with some study questions. I think that all of these questions, you can find the responses in the PowerPoint presentation that will be made available on the site. If you have any questions, I haven't left my mail address here, but I will make sure that my mail address is part of the PowerPoint that will be found on the website. That was all for me. If you have any immediate questions, I'll be happy to try to respond.